The debates that you're talking about are part of a deeply rooted dynamic in American society that plays out in the political marketplace, in the business marketplace, and in the marketplace of ideas, the so-called public square. This is not a new phenomenon. It's gone on for a long time. And two questions reoccur throughout this. To whom is the corporation responsible, and for what? And that debate and the answer to those questions has changed in each era. And so we see this as a recurrent dynamic, something that will continue not only in the past, but going into the future.
If you look at the post-World War II period, particularly moving from the 50s into the 60s, there were tremendous pressures for social change developing. In fact, a social consciousness was developing in the 60s, driven primarily by movements like the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the consumers movement, and the environmental movement. And these movements and reflections of public opinion have captured the essence of how the public feels about these issues. And consequently, these have been the primary drivers. The public expectation has been the primary driver. And as you know, the revolution of rising expectations that began perhaps in the 1960s when each succeeding generation was expected to have more and do better than the previous generation. By the same token, more was expected out of companies as well, and they've had to give more as a consequence. So these are kind of the outside, the external drivers, but internally, I think from the point of view of professionalism, companies have wanted to do a much more sophisticated, polished job at responding to stakeholders' requests. So that's been part of the acceptance as well.
Well, as a historian, I'm especially struck by the richness of the story, the depth of it, the complexity of it, even in the imagery of it, as the book, I think, well reflects. And as a historian, I'm also always interested in how the past can speak to the present. And I think this book has done an amazing job of doing that. The ability, I think, of someone who's even a contemporary CEO of a company to go back into that history and find in it inspiration, examples, and ideas, I think is a perfect illustration of how history can be a tool for people in the present day.
The rise of NGOs is enormous in the last 30 years. And they are very important. They are important as being a third voice besides government and commerce in what we do. Now, sometimes NGOs get carried away and don't always get their facts right, but they're a very good counterbalance to when we get too involved either in trying to make money or in trying to do government regulation. So they've been an enormous force in our society for the last 10 years.
I think the biggest insight and the biggest takeaway is the tenacity with which American society has approached the subject of corporate responsibility as a possibility. You know, in many other societies, corporations would have been drawn into the public sector when they misbehaved, and the problem of capitalism would be solved by eliminating capitalism. But in our society, the American attitude has been, if the corporation is not behaving in a way that is socially acceptable, we work on the corporation until it does. We try to develop within the corporation a conscience. To me, that insight about American society is one well worth taking away. The other side of that insight is that it's a precarious tenacity. That is, the future may or may not continue to hold true to that conviction.